Just imagine for a moment, there would be a category for the most useless HDR calibration screen in a video game. I'm not saying that Grid Legends will win first place, but it's very close. Okay, so let's just forget for a moment that we have fake or broken HDR in Grid Legends. Let's focus a little bit on this great HDR brightness screen setting, or whatever you want to call this, calibration screen. It is absolutely useless because regardless of what you set here, there's no indication what you have to do actually. All what this thing is telling you is use the slider to adjust screen HDR brightness. But to what? What is my reference? What do I have to do? Because, and I know my camera can't catch this, we have a couple of, I don't know, bars here, and here's also a bar which I can see, distinguish between complete black or OLED black and the next step. I can see this. Even I'm changing this to 0, I can see it. I know my camera can't catch this, and if I would turn off my lights, this would be even more visible. So I really don't know what to do. I mean, obviously 0 is completely wrong and also 100 is completely wrong, but what is the right setting? There is no indicator what I have to do, and this test screen, test pattern, whatever you call it, is absolutely useless. But of course you still like to know what is my recommended settings in terms of this HDR brightness slider here, and yeah, my recommended setting is actually between 50 and maximum 80, and it depends on your environment, what your TV is. If you're playing HGiG, dynamic tone mapping on, it's very hard actually to make a recommendation because again, HDR is fake or broken in this game. I wouldn't actually say broken, it's for me a little bit more fake because this setting here is mainly changing the HUD, the user interface elements on the screen, and I will show you this of course in a second. So even you set this to 100, the specular highlights in this game are limited to 500 candela, but the HUD, the user interface, can be as bright as up to 1250 candela, which of course is for an OLED screen, and when you play this game for a very long time, not a good idea. Okay, so let's have a closer look on my HDR measurements, and what I have done is I changed the slider to 100 and I started with the maximum peak brightness in this game, and I found that specular highlights like this, they're having 1250 nits, which is of course a little bit too much for the G2, way too much for the CX, but for my QN95B it's not too bad. Then I moved on and I did a little bit of more measurements in terms of changing the sliders to around 80, 82, 85, and I found, hey, now I have 976 candela, which fits the G2 of course perfectly, but still a little bit too much for the CX. So I decreased the slider again to around 55 and I found 800 nits here from this very bright background here. It's perfect for the CX. And then I compared a couple of screenshots and then I realized something. Okay, so let's have a closer look on the screenshots what I have shown you just a second ago, and we're starting with the screenshots where I measured, or my program is actually telling me maximum peak brightness is 1250 nits. But when we now turning on the luminance heat map, we can actually see that the specular highlights here, which are supposed to be very bright in the game, and when we now comparing this with the heat map here, we can see this is around 400 to 600 candela. But what you can see hopefully is that the HUD, all the information on the screen are deep red, which means very, very bright, and the same counts for all the other screenshots. When we're just taking the 800 candela screenshots and I'm doing exactly the same, you can see here that this background is around 400 to 600 candela, and again the HUD is already darker or goes into red compared to this one here. So you can see that this value here has nothing to do with the background, it's really just purely the HUD. And when we now having a look on the last picture here, which is around 1000 candela, you can see it also. This is the specular highlights here around 400 to 600 candela, and again the HUD now very, very bright, 1000 candela. So again, this is unfortunately fake HDR, broken HDR, whatever you like to call it. And as soon as I disabled the user interface, I found the correct measurements or correct values in terms of the maximum peak brightness on specular highlights like this lamp or the headlights here on the car. 360 candela, just 360 candela with brightness setting to 50. When you change now the brightness setting to 60, there's a little bit of an increasement in terms of the maximum peak brightness on specular highlights here, but not even close to the capabilities from the G2 or the CX. Changing the HDR brightness setting to 70 didn't give me any increasement in terms of specular highlights or maximum peak brightness on specular highlights. Still just 400 candela like with setting to 60, at least on this screenshot. Setting the HDR brightness slider to 80 increases the maximum peak brightness a little bit to 424 candela, but still not even close to actually have a proper HDR experience on a CX or G2. And last but not least, I changed the HDR brightness slider to 100, and yes, I forgot to take a screenshot with the brightness slider set to 90, but setting it to 100 gives us a maximum peak brightness of around 470 candela. Again, not even close to the capabilities of our LG CX, G2, S95B or any other high-end HDR screen. And by the way, the HDR game calibration screen on the Xbox Series does not have any impact in the game. And as always, the question is now HGiG dynamic tone mapping on or dynamic tone mapping on. And in most of the cases, I'm telling you, do not use dynamic tone mapping off, because you will lose a lot of, let's say, punch or impact on specular highlights like the sun here. I hope my camera can actually catch this, but HGiG gives you better specular highlights compared to dynamic tone mapping off. Again, do not use dynamic tone mapping off. It is really the worst choice in this game. Dynamic tone mapping on the other hand, is doing what we know from dynamic tone mapping on. It will brighten up the picture. In this case, actually very much, because we're still talking about just 500 candela on specular highlights, which means there is a lot of headroom for dynamic tone mapping on to make the whole picture much brighter. And it's absolutely up to you if you like this more or the more accurate way HGiG is actually displaying the picture. Again, this is absolutely up to you. I found HGiG is more than bright, and believe me, my camera is making the picture a little bit darker than it is at the moment. So dynamic tone mapping on at this stage right now doesn't look correct to me, because it's just way too bright, over bright, and actually you lose a lot of contrast in my opinion compared to HGiG. So, but again, it's absolutely up to you. Depends on your environment, of course, if you play in a very dark room, if you play in a very bright room. But my recommendation actually is HGiG and setting brightness to 50. And then of course we have Dolby Vision on the Xbox Series X, but compared to HGiG and HDR10, there shouldn't be any difference, because this game does not support Dolby Vision natively, and all what Dolby Vision is doing actually is taking the HDR10 metadata and then displaying the picture. So if you see a big difference between HDR10, HGiG and Dolby Vision, then this is most likely because of different picture settings on your TV, and not that, or not because Dolby Vision or HDR10 is doing something different. What you like to use, it really doesn't matter on the LG CX or G2 or any other LG TV, because between Dolby Vision and HDR10 there is zero difference in terms of input lag. Therefore, yeah, you choose whatever you like more. Again, my recommendation is still setting 50, even you use Dolby Vision, because yeah, 50 gives you the best contrast in my opinion, the best compromise in terms of contrast. Still, I'm very disappointed in terms of the HDR presentation, because we have a lot of tracks in this game with great lighting actually, and if we would have a better HDR presentation, this game would be much better. Okay, so what is my summary now for Grid Legends on the Xbox Series X? And I like the gameplay actually. It's of course very arcadish, but I like it. What I don't like is the below average HDR presentation actually. I mean, don't get me wrong, it does look better in my opinion than SDR, because it's still a little bit more powerful, but it's not even close to games like Forza Horizon 5 or Gran Turismo 7 in terms of HDR, or many other games. That's a little bit of a disappointment, because when we considering we have actually Electronic Arts behind this game and Codemasters, then we have companies there that are actually, they should be very well experienced with doing proper presentations in video games. But you can see, even we have very big names, that doesn't mean anything. Anyway, I can recommend this game because it's for free on Game Pass, or not for free, you get my point. You pay Game Pass, but the game is for free right now. It is fun, but don't expect too much in terms of HDR. That's it for this video. I say thank you very much for watching me, and I see you guys next time. Bye.